Good morning, everyone. I am Camila Guimarães, and today I will mediate the second conference of Highrise Symposium, Highrise Living in and the Inclusive City. This conference, entitled Buenos Aires, a dewesternized gaze to verticalization process, will be taught by Professor Julio Arroyo. First, I would like to thank everyone who is following us on YouTube. I take this opportunity to tell those who want to ask a question, you can write it in the chat on YouTube during the conference. I would like to present a brief curriculum of our speaker. Professor Julio Arroyo is an architect, a professor of architectural design and architecture theory and criticism, and a researcher at Faculdade de Arquitetura, Design e Urbanismo in the Universidade Nacional del Litoral, Santa Fe, Argentina. He is a national researcher level 2, and the focus of his investigation is on architecture and public space in the contemporary context, and social and cultural processes. Author of the book Espaço Público, Entre Afirmações e Desplazamento, and editor of Paulo Mendes da Rocha, Entre Ideias e Dibujos. He participates in many academic activities, conference, and graduate teaching, developed in national and foreign universities in the United States, Mexico, Brazil, Spain, and Belgium. He was also the coordinator of Santa Fe Municipal Urban Plan between the years 2008 and 2014. Professor Julio talked today about the verticalization process in Buenos Aires, object of a long research related to Highrise project. So, to start our conference, I would like to invite Professor Julio Arroyo with his lecture, Buenos Aires, a dewesternized gaze to verticalization process.
Thank you very much, Camila. Thank you very much also to Christian and Manuel, and through them to all the people around this wonderful Highrise project. And I'm very grateful for being part of it, at least in a modest way. So I appreciate very much this opportunity. I should like to share my presentation, if possible, which is, as you said, Camila, Buenos Aires, the westernized guide to verticalization. Okay, just an introduction for you to know where we are. We are talking about the national capital of Argentina, Buenos Aires. I myself, right now in Santa Fe, 500 kilometers to the northwest of Buenos Aires. And I have a brief abstract, but what I want to introduce is the relationship of the city with the Rio de la Plata, which is the reason of the existence of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires was set up by Spanish conquistadors and colonizers in this 1573, and since that moment it was the main harbor of the territory and the connection with the world. Buenos Aires has an extraordinary extension and very clear pattern of a Spanish foundation city, which is the grid, the damero. We divide the urban land in squares, very, very clear, as you can see, the very regular grid. And in the case of Buenos Aires, there was an intervention at the beginning of the last century with the opening of the Avenida de Mayo, which is the large axis, the horizontal axis you can see from the Plaza de Mayo at the east to the Plaza del Congreso, the Parliament House, at the west, and you have an intersection, which is the very wide avenue, which is the 9 de Julio, and two extraordinary traces there, which are the diagonals, a strange element in this gridded urban plan. The characteristic so is the block, la manzana, the block, which is in the most of the area of the capital district, very high dense blocks. Okay, let me a few minutes to say something about the aesthetic narratives of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires, as most of the city, gives reasons to writers, poets, painters to think about the city and to express ideas about the city. In this case, I want to mention Sul Solar, who works with the idea of the vertical Buenos Aires, the idea of a Buenos Aires that goes from the land to the sky, but always facing to the river, the Rio de la Plata, as the main sense of the city properly. Here you see 1973 Aquarela. It was a series. There is a series which is called the Ciudad Lagui, the city of the water, but the water is just at the back of the image, and what you can see in the front is the vertical city, the one that goes to the sky. This idea of the city as a strong, hard contrast between the nature that you can see at the very front of the image, the campo, the country yard, is also an idea of the artificiality of the city properly. In this vision, very oniric vision of the city, there is a reason, the idea of the city of an experience of density, an experience of collectiveness. Sul Solar works by the time of this iconic building, the Cabana, was built up. So there was a kind of parallelism between the work of Sul Solar and the idea of verticality of an intense and dense city, and the Cabana as a real, factic expression of the verticality in the city. You know well Jorge Luis Borges, that has a wonderful poem, which is the mythical fountain of Buenos Aires. I'm not going to read it, but I let it for you if you may be interested in. And the mythic fountain of Buenos Aires talks about a city with no time, because its origins are lost in the deep and dark origins of the times. So Buenos Aires as a city that was always there. He also speaks about the river, a city which is a waterfront, and he also refers to the countryside. Beside the land and the water is the city, like an artificial, like a human construction. The point of Jorge Luis Borges is a very interesting narrative of what he considers the essence, the first reason of the city. For him is the block, the manzana. And considering that Buenos Aires is a city of regular blocks, a city of manzanas regulares, he speaks about the sense of the urban open space in Buenos Aires. Which that's the distance of a quadra. That's a unit of the experience of the space in Buenos Aires. You can walk 1 quadra, 2 quadras, 3 quadras, and you have a sequence of movement in the city, which is recognized by Jorge Luis Borges in his poem. Okay, there are some other narratives, aesthetic narratives. In this case, another very impressive, thoughtful photograph, who is Horacio Coppola. He, in the 30s and in the 30s and in the 40s, recognized the spirit of the city associated with the life at night and the value of the corners, the city, street life, and the nocturnity were some of his themes. No, he proposes. Also, the everyday life in Buenos Aires. What tried to do Coppola was to capture, to grasp the idea of a very vital intensity and the role of the architecture in order to make possible the life of the city. Another aspect of his work is how he recognized the straight lines of the fabric, of the urban fabric in the city. He recognized here the possibility of the flat land as the geographical support of the abstract grid of the city. This is the possibility of the long visuals, the long distances along a straight street, which is in the conception, not only in the perception of the space, but also in the more deep conception of the idea of city. As many of Argentinian cities, the grid is a structural element, and the psychological organization of the space is through the orthogonality and the straight lines of the urban fabric. Well, here there are 2 more pictures of the nightlife in Buenos Aires that for the time had an idea of progress associated with 2 main references. First of all, Europe, of course, and mainly the French culture. But at the beginning of the 19th century, about the 20s and the 30s, the new reference was New York, the North American city, especially what refers to the nightlife of the city, the lights of the theaters, and so on. So what I'm trying to explain here is that there is a rich narrative in the case of Buenos Aires that is it is based and at the same time a contribution to a cultural milieu of Buenos Aires, to a way of being porteño. Porteño is the designation, the name given to the people who live in Buenos Aires. Porteño is a word, Spanish word, that comes from puerto. Porteño is the one who belongs to the puerto. The puerto, the harbor, as the connection, the weight of making, establishing links with the world. So Buenos Aires was, since its very beginning, very open to the world in general, and to the main cores of the industrialized world at the end of the 18th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. So, after this brief presentation of Buenos Aires, I want to talk about a research we began to do 3 years ago with Franco Giardino, an architect from my school. It was about the elaboration, a database of the main architectural main buildings, the main cases of vertical buildings through the time in Buenos Aires, just to recognize the evolution of the vertical typologies buildings, trying to make a further relationship with the political and economical evolution of the city. This was a preliminary advance of the research, and we recognize all the periods you can see there. First of all, the colonial and independence and national organizations in the 19th century, the liberal modernization in the switch from the 19th to the 20th century, the conservatism with the nationalist conservatism in the 30s and the 40s, and the introduction of the Peronism and what we call the post-Peronism since 1948 and 1957 about. Then we had, after the Peronismo, the desarrollismo, the developmental period, which was interrupted by the first military dictatorship of the second half of the last century. And then we have the period we can recognize till now, which is from the 17th to 2018. And here we began this period with the worst military dictatorship from the 1976 through 1983, and then the republic and the democracy order till now. Following these periods, the main production of high-rise building was, of course, in these last three periods. And in one of them, we try to recognize several variables. It doesn't matter, it doesn't mind here to read them, but who is the owner, the degree of development, the urban effects, the symbolic associations. Okay, there were three levels of recognitions: cultural dimension, the urban architectural dimension, and the productive dimension. We try to recognize through different cases, architectural cases. In this graphic, you can see a comparative relationship of the gross domestic product. And we can find a very similar evolution in Argentina, Chile, Brazil, and Mexico since through the 19th century, about 2015. We made an association of the quantity of high-rise buildings of the previous periods I saw you. We can recognize clearly that there is a high degree of increasement since the 1970 till now. The two last periods makes a big, concentrates a great number of aggregation of high-rise buildings in Buenos Aires. I must say that Buenos Aires is just 1/3 of the country. Buenos Aires is a hyperdimensionate city. It's a macrocephalia. Buenos Aires is about 14 million people, and the national population of Argentina is about 45 million. So 1/3 of the people are living living in Buenos Aires, in the metropolitan area, and properly in what is the autonomous city of Buenos Aires, the national capital, are about 3.5 million people. So what I'm going to speak is, what I'm speaking is about the city of Buenos Aires, the head city of the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. There is where there is the more concentration, the biggest concentration of capitals, but not only the concentration of high-rise buildings, because the city is, and this typology of densification with high buildings is very expanded through all the metropolitan area. So, talking about main cases, it just to have a visualization. This is, let me see. You see the mouse moving or no? Sorry, Camila, is visible or no? No. Okay. You can see here the Plaza de Mayo and the pink house, Casa de Gobierno, and after that was the original place of the foundational place of Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires was a harbor since its very beginning, as I said, and there was there the customs tailor that was one of the first important buildings. But as I told you, the idea of the Plaza, los dos congresos and the Plaza de Mayo through the Avenida de Mayo was an important axis opening in 1894. And that gave rise to this kind of architecture, very European, and was the proud of Buenos Aires to be an European city in South America. The city as Paris, a city as Madrid, and that was a motive of big proud in the city since the very beginning. The Avenida de Mayo concentrates one of the best architecture, eclectic architecture in Argentina, and it was present there the first concept of verticalization, and is one of the more interesting cases, the Barolo Palace, at in 1923, and also you can find through the time different expressions, different architectural expressions, concentrates in the downtown area of Buenos Aires. But each one of these, this is the Cabana I saw before, each one of these cases of high-rise buildings made a contribution to that narrative of a city progress, a city with identity, a city with personality. There was an important incidence with the condominium law of the 1948. Before the condominium law, o ley de propiedad horizontal in Spanish, buildings such as the Barolo or the Cabana, each one of these buildings belong to a singular ownership. It was casas de renta, rent for houses, but usually there was only one ownership for each one of these buildings. So why is important this condominium law of 1948? The important is that it introduced a different property on each one of the floors of the building. So one unit, one edificated unit may correspond to one ownership. So in a building, there may be different owners, and this is expressed here. It was part of the law, was part of a larger policy of democratic access to real estate property proposed by Peronismo, by Perón. The law allowed the division of a building by apartments, not only by floors. It was conceived as a dynamizer of the real estate market and an agent of urban renovation. And its development was stimulated through mortgages financed by state funds, mostly. This law, of course, has a long and hard impact in the real estate. Also, it established changes in the design criteria compared to previous rental houses. About this, the maintenance cost, quality of materials, and construction methods were enhanced. There was a generic user and generic details, service and amenities introduced in the buildings. There has been a decrease in the amount of common spaces because they were non-profitable, and a maximum use of the plot of the urban parcel, better hygienic conditions. So this was a landmark in the urban legislation, of course, and it allowed and enhanced the construction of high-rise buildings. There was in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s an explosion of high-rise in Buenos Aires. In this case, this is one of the most interesting cases of rational architecture, is the Hogar Obrero by Vladimiro Acosta and Federico Beretta-Arvide and Angelo Felici in 1955. I want to remark here how the high rise is placed in the block and establish some kind of relationship with the street, the positive relationship with the street, because of the horizontal block that is the real contact of this complex with the city, where there are retail shops and so on, and then at the back the tall building with the apartments. Following with this brief revision, I want to just to mention briefly the three ways that high-rise building may be introduced in the urban plot, which is the Unitarian division of the block. Okay, these are the three ways from the medianera to medianera, the A case. That's going from lateral to lateral of the plot. The second is making an offset from one of the sides, and the third is the case of the freestanding buildings. And these are the basic typologies we can find through all the Buenos Aires city and the metropolitan area. And this is the 3D consequence of that way of using the urban land. This is the case of one of the high standard neighborhoods in Buenos Aires, which is Belgrano, that gives a very good quality of life because of the mix of high-rise and greenery in the city. A very interesting urban fabric. So this is the city as Sul Solar once imagined, with the river at the back, but at the same time with the river is there, it is close, but at the same time is far away because the city by itself, its intensity, its density, gives to the porteños a very hard everyday experience, because it's a city not always easy to move through. It's a city plenty of inequalities, always the expression of the social conflict. So the peaceful image given by the aerial view is, of course, not so peaceful in the everyday life. But after all, the city is a good opportunity for, I think, enhancing the life. Porteños love to live in this busy, in this conflicted city, after all. At the middle of the last century, there was the idea of district in Buenos Aires, the development districts, and one of them was the Catalina Norte, close to the main train stations in Buenos Aires. That was part of the harbor areas that that were transformed into residential and office zoning of residential, high standard, and office buildings. That was the origin of one of the district buildings, the business district in Buenos Aires, with a set of initially 3 or 4 buildings, and then completed through the years. That was the image Buenos Aires wanted for itself. The Catalina Norte was celebrated as the image of the Buenos Aires, of what Buenos Aires ought to be. Buenos Aires must be this kind of city. This was the hegemonic discourse about the city. A business city, a financial city, a very progressive, industrialized city, and this area was the evidence of that discourse. To say some other examples of the architecture of these periods, the neo-brutalism is also important here. In this case, the Rioja housing complex is for people, workers, and it's out of the downtown in a regular and traditional middle-class neighborhood in the south of Buenos Aires, in this case. And it's interesting because the introduction of the idea of the bridges, and here the the thinking of Team 10 and Bakima and some other European experiences of the architectural of integration of how buildings may produce and enhance, allow a more active and positive social integration is given in this high-rise building. So what I'm trying to say is the high-rise gives the opportunity also to make some explorations through the architectural form in order to get a better social integration. By the time, even during the military rulerships, there was a great development of affordable houses in the south and southwest of the city of Buenos Aires. As you can see here, there was an impact and a different fabric, a different tejido, urban tissue, with a very high concentration of peoples in these kinds of fabrics. These are the high rise associated with the affordable and popular houses, even by the state, which is a very strong presence in Buenos Aires. So this is the other phase of the high-rise building of the 19th century, because from the Catalinas Nortes and the visible city, the visible image of the progressive city of the industrialized and well-connected city, and this is the other phase to the popular and the unequal society in the other side of the city, the inner side and the south side of the city. This is Villa Lugano 1 and 2 is a large complex with different concepts here, the idea of a free street level and in the first floor, there was all the services connected with Bridget also, and then 10 or 12 upper floors for residential with services, facilities, and so on. Well, this idea is also associated with the concept of social mobility that is very important in Buenos Aires. And for a long time, it was a social motivation, a very strong social motivation. The mobility in Argentina was possible, in Buenos Aires it was possible. Here in the last period, well, okay, again, the Catalinas Norte, because of the complementation of the riverfront, but also in this last period, we recognize the appearance of the isolated element, the tower, only a singular element, only a singular tower in a whole block, as you can see at the center of the image. The concept is that the tower is self-sufficient because it has all the services and just needs from the surrounding street just the location, just to be close, to be near from the central area, from the institutional centers, but not a real relationship with the surroundings in terms of social, cultural relationships. So this is an isolated element. This is a singular element, one unique element in one block. So this is a break of the concept of the urban fabric with contact, connection, attached one building to the other. And this was the Le Parc Tower by architect Mario Roberto Alvarez in 1992, a landmark in the concept of the private city, that it's in certain way an expression of the privatopia, no? The concept of the preeminence of the private life as an enclosure, as a cluster of privatopy. Then we have, on the same sense, different Syria. It begins a series of different high-rise buildings that makes a difference between the previous periods, because we are speaking here about the exclusions, the elitism, the segregation, also the capture of the symbolic elements. And perhaps in these periods, what is best recognizable is the Puerto Madero intervention, the transformation of the old harbor of Puerto Madero that was obsolete and is at the rear of the Pink House in Buenos Aires. This picture shows the area of Puerto Madero. It is easy to recognize where is Plaza de Mayo and the Pink House, because from that core initiates the diagonals. So you can see there the center cultural, historical, political core of Argentina, which is Plaza de Mayo. And at the rear of Plaza de Mayo, at the east of the image, we can see the different docks of Puerto Madero, and then a green area, which is an ecological reserve, which is an artificial land that separates the river from the city. Remember that the Aduana Taylor was where now is the Pink House. So the river has been set back a long distance, and the relationship with the river is at the same time, a proximity relation, a very kindly relationship, but also it's an idea of something which is far away. So what happened in Puerto Madero? Puerto Madero happened one of the biggest transformation, because the transformation followed properly the logic of global financement. It's the first big project in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, that it is strictly in accordance with the logic of transnational fluxes of capital. And it has been, we must recognize, very successful. Why? Because Puerto Madero could develop, nevertheless, the repeated crisis, financial and economical crisis in Argentina. So what happened in Puerto Madero is that we get a new image of the city, a new kind of symbolic relationship with the skyline and the green area of the ecological reserve, which is between the high-rise buildings and the river, the Rio de la Plata, which is at the back of the point of view. So, till now, to comment, to depict the evolution of the high-rise buildings in Argentina in the different political periods. But let me talk about some critical topics in Argentina that have a special impact in Buenos Aires city. This is a very interesting graphic. The graphic expresses the quantity of years of life of Argentines in context of economic recessions. In the horizontal axis, you have the age of people. And in the vertical axis, you have the intensity of the recession. And you can see different segments of peoples, and the young people in Argentina, which is the first segment, it spends almost all his life, I mean, people between 20 and 30 years old, has had almost all his life in recession, economical recession periods. And people of my age, over 60s, 1/3 of my life has been suffering economical crisis. This is to express how the psyche of the Argentinian is adapted to the crisis. We have, through the history of the Argentina, in the last 150 years, we had 16 economic crises. So the economic cycle has a break. About one crisis each 10 years, which is something very crazy, because what the feature is that Argentina is always recovering of a crisis. And when doing that, you have a new crisis. So the instability, the absolutely absence of stability, makes a kind of mental condition for Argentinians. So we are adapt to live in crisis times. And the worst consequence of this is that young people don't know how to live in another way. So we have to develop a tactic of living in cities according to the intensiveness of the crisis. So because of this, cities in Argentina, Buenos Aires in particular, is a place of conflict, because it's a place where every day you have to think about what things are going to be. This is another aspect. There is a global present index developed by Elcano Institute in Madrid, Spain. This index aggregates and quantifies, based on objective data, the foreign projection and international positioning of countries based on the three dimensions that make up their presence: economic, military, and what they call the soft presence. The soft presence are cultural, university, technology, new developments. Military are troops and arms, and economy, well, the energy, primary production, industry, etc. So the index establish how much is the presence of each country in the global world. And Argentina is very bad because it is in the in the 34, 35 position. Brazil is about the 20, and Chile is more or less for there. And of course, the main countries, United States, Europe, Central and Mediterranean countries in Europe are in the higher positions. So what happened with these comparisons? That we are in Western, we are in Occidente, but we are in a very wide wave. We are in a, what I like to say, in a lateral position, in the margins of the Western world. And the trends is that we are going in an even time more weak situation. So this is very important also because Argentina, from the point of view of the Human Development Index, is in a very good situation. It's among the best countries with high level of the index. As you can see, Argentina is in the darkest area of the world, according to the this map. But if we pay attention to this, this is the Human Development Index, but the variation. And here Argentina is backing down in the index in the last year. So we used to be a country with a wonderful position from the point of view of the Human Development Index. But now we are moving fastly to a not so favorable condition. This is another index of that things are not going well in Argentina. Which countries threat most? Argentina used to be among the first 10 countries, and now is, as you can see, at the right column in a very far away position. So what I titled this slide with fatidic economy, the three elements that characterize Argentina in its economy in the last periods, in the last years, the deterioration of the international reserves in dollars of the central bank. You can see how it's going down. The depreciation of the national currency, the peso, and the evolution of the blue dollar, which is the parallel, the non-official dollar, which speaks about a secondary market, and the impressive loans from the International Monetary Funds through the 20th century, reaching an extraordinary level in the Mauricio Macri's presidency with a huge loan from the International Monetary Fund. All this speaks about a very weak economy and a very critical evolution of the policies about the economy in the country. So, what about the densification of the country? What about the verticalization of the country under these situations? How could we explain this? Well, Argentina went into the neoliberalism after the desarrollismo, the development period, in two moments. The first of these moments were the military dictatorship of 1976 through 1983. Sorry, it's wrongly written there. There was, beside the repression and the missing people, that was the terrorism of the state as the main fact of this period, was the open of the economy and the finishing of the industrialization period. So with the policies of Martínez de Hoz, the Minister of Economy of the militaries, Argentina opened its economy, and it was a hit for the national production, from the national economy, and especially for the regional economies in Argentina. And so the other movement, the other so special movement, is the Carlos Menem's administration from 1999 through 1999. In this period, there was a huge and very impressive transformation of the nation in a very short time, because Carlos Menem was re-elected president of the nation, but the transformation just took only the 2 first years of all his long administration. And the transformation of the country was extremely deep, because it was not only in the economy level, but also in the societal and cultural level. In the economy, a massive privatization of state companies, the strengthening of the financial sector, the primarization of the economy, and the extractivism as the logic of the production. From the point of view of the social, we made a shift from a society of classes, middle classes, upper classes, popular classes, and the idea of a conflict between classes, through a society of segments, segmented society, segments of economic segments, and states. The idea of we are politicians, you are cartoneros, they are villeros, those are high class, and so on. So no more classes, but states and segments as the general way of visualization of the society. That was a very impressive and really a change with large consequences till now, of course. We introduced the mentality of the preeminence of the private, the privatismo, as a way of living and sensing the city. Also the individualism, the consumerism, and the hedonism, as a way of living the city and understanding the public of the city. The public was something that inspires fear. The public is not good, the public is bad, or through the medias, it was very deep, the introduction of the discourse about the importance of the private and the negative incidence in your personal life of the state in representation of the public. So, individualism, privatism, consumerism, hedonism were I appreciate very much to use these four elements to explain how public realm transformed in a dangerous milieu. Alterity, the others are no more recognized as the something that could be respected, but it's a source of fear from the point of view of the physicity. There is a discontinuity due to the enclosure, the exclusivity, the safe and sophisticated environments of the malls, the shopping centers. The idea of the enclosure is absolutely important, but pay attention that this happens relatively late in Argentina in comparison with Brazil, because this is about the 90s, the 92, 93, 1992, 1993, when we began to this idea of the cities of enclosures, the shopping malls and the closed neighborhoods and so on. It was very strong here, the idea of the city as a niche for business opportunities, of course, because there was the commodification of the urban escapes, also the commodification of the traditional environments and traditional neighborhoods, and the appropriation of symbolic elements, the natural places. There was a shift also from the concept of the liberal citizenship to the target customer. So the high-rise buildings began to be designed and offered in the real estate market in order to segment customers. That was a new way of segregation, physical and social segregation in the city. And the socioeconomic segmentation means no more middle class as a main aspirational model. So the new lifestyles was associated with the weakness of the mythical middle class as the main reference model in society. So there are new ways of living in city, the new domestic life that is found their references abroad, mostly in what we call the Miami style. So there were different possibilities for high-income people to give up the city and to move to the country clubs. That was the more impressive and the biggest impact in Buenos Aires city in the 90s. So many people with high income who abandoned the city in order to go to the gated suburbanized areas that by the time was an explosion of a sprawl of what here called country clubs. The other option was to remain in the city, but living in the vertical communities. And it's those singular towers in a block that gives a presence in the skyline of the city, but not a positive presence in the neighborhood life. But this socioeconomic segmentation for the average income people gives also the possibility of affordable vertical dwellings, because the real estate was active through the periods, even with the different crises, but was active through the period, giving possibility for average income people in Buenos Aires. It's not the same in other cities. Okay. Why is different the neoliberalism in Argentina? How to explain the Argentinian way of neoliberalization? I want to mention Ivana Sokolov, a researcher of the University of Buenos Aires and the CONICET, who explains, in a way I agree with her, what happened with the neoliberalism in Buenos Aires. A paragraph says, it could be said that the international financial system did not inject funds into the local real estate sector, except in the brief period 2005-2007, a process that was later interrupted by the international crisis. On the contrary, it would seem to be the savings of Argentines abroad that were turned to real estate investment in other regions, among which Uruguay, Punta del Este and Montevideo, and Florida, Miami, stand out as the main destinations. So I agree with her in that the flux of financial capitals was not so intense in Buenos Aires as in other cities, in other great metropolitan areas in the world. Why? Because Argentina is not a trustable country. Of course, there are a logic of financement which is established, which is active, but the intensity of this logic is not so much. It's a weak financial capitalism which is working in Buenos Aires. Even more, there is an important exodus of capitals that goes away from Argentina, and the flux of capital is, in the contrary sense, Argentinian people are making investments abroad, and as she said, in Uruguay, for instance, or in Florida. What happened here? We have a logic, but at the same time, we have a weakness in the application of such a logic. This is the base on which I try to make this hypothesis to understand the verticalization in Buenos Aires, and by extension in Argentina. The process of adding mid-rise and tall buildings is not the same as the verticalization one. Both share the phenomenon of the densification of the fabric and express social inequality. But the former contributes in a general sense to the open, although conflicted, public city, and the later to a closed private city. So I want to make a difference between before and after the 90s, before and after the period in which the neoliberalism was introduced in all the levels of the Argentinian experience. Previously, we have an intense Buenos Aires, an intense process of densification in Buenos Aires by the introduction of the high-rise buildings in the block, trying to make that idea of the dense city, but at the same time of an open city. That doesn't mean an equal city. Of course, there was an open, but at the same time very conflicted, very unequitable city. After the 19th, there is another logic, the global financement working in the city, but at the same time in a very vague way, in a very selective and exclusive areas. And even so, the development of the vertical process was mostly a change in the mind of the people. According to Tardot-Larval, that explained that the neoliberalism is more than an economic policy, but it's a cultural change because it's a kind of infiltration of the values of the individualism, the privatism, the consumerism, the hedonistic way of life. It's an infection of these values in the social corpus in a very transversal way. So different segments of the society accept, incorporate these values. And I think this is one of the, maybe an hypothesis to, for understanding how much is accepted, is received, the verticalization in Buenos Aires. The second, and associated with the first one, is says that political instability, repeated financial crises, and intense social conflict have displaced Argentina from the group of emerging countries to those of countries at risk. So global capital stopped flowing to Buenos Aires. And since that moment, verticalization is mostly financed with national capital. Verticalization, the third hypothesis, is a strong cultural feature because mobilizes imaginaries of progress, powers, and city life. Okay, but regarding the second one, the political instability, repeated financial crisis, and intense social conflict displaced Argentina from the group of emerging countries. Emerging countries of the BRICS, Brazil, India, and so on. Argentina is not there. And it's a critical country that it's measured by the level of risk. So it's so risky, Argentina, and so unstable that it's not a good place for the global capital's investments. The third hypothesis is that verticalization is placed in the acceptance, in the cultural social acceptance. O sea, it's not bad in Buenos Aires to live in high-rise buildings, but the way of living is different according to the position you have in the segmented society. Private capitals, public capitals, and third sector capitals. The national capital from the agro-industrial incomes, the agro-industrial rents are the main ways of financial the verticalization, the current verticalization in Buenos Aires, more than the global funds because of the reasons I have written in accordance with the Sol-Colomov. The national government and the provincial governments provide capital for the verticalization, but in very secondary way. And the third sector now has, in the last periods, just minimum participation in the financement of the verticalization of Buenos Aires. So the private capital, according to the logic of the financing, is the main resources. But I want to point out that mainly national capitals in comparison with global funds. The state, of course, prepares the conditions or gives the conditions for the best investment of capitals. After the horizontal property law of 1948, we have three special movements from the legislative point of view. The ley of fideicomiso of financiamiento de la financement of dwelling and construction, 1995, that gives the possibility of new kind of association of capitals. The other law is the ley de financiamiento productivo from the renovation of the market of capitals, the stocks, and so on, from a law given in 2012, and the law of public-private participation from 2016. Fideicomiso, stock markets, and PPA, public-private association, were the three main instruments of the last 20 years for the verticalization of the city. Which were the most used? Well, I think the first and the second, the fideicomiso, and the second were which had the first, mainly the fideicomiso, and second term, the financing product, the stock markets were important in order to enhance the increasement of the verticalization of the city. Not so important is the private-public participation, which is very, very scarce, not relevant. And the local government, the government of the city itself, because the previous ones were national legislation, but the city itself had in the period two important modifications in the urban norms. In 2013, the transferencia de edificabilidad. This is certificates of transference of edificability for the case that's because of restrictions in an area, you can build, transfer the square meters to another area. That is from the 2013. And a new urbanistic code, very, very new, from 2019. These are the last modifications or updates Buenos Aires give, and now with the new Código Urbanístico, there are important new opportunities for the high-rise development because of establish a limit of the height of the buildings, and introduce the concept of the maximum volume, different kinds of relationship with the street, and in a progressive sense. But what is more I'm interesting, and it's the area I can move a little bit better, is thinking about the High Line as imaginary of progress. What means for people the high rise? What does it mean for anyone to live in a high-rise building of the verticalization of the city? And I think even considering the repeated crisis in Argentina, there is even now the idea of mobility, that we can move, and it is possible, and the densification is an alternative. But for the middle classes, it's just the opportunity of living in Buenos Aires. Middle class in Buenos Aires, in the capital area, is live in this kind of city. And for the high or the upper classes, that who are looking for the elitism, and well, here the Highrise gives, of course, the opportunity. But the imaginaries of power is also present with the idea of the tall, of the big. Buenos Aires has a large tradition of the state giving dwelling in high-rise buildings. And this is these neighborhoods are a expectation, a social expectation in Buenos Aires. To live here is just an achievement of the welfare state. So military governments and constitutional governments had the idea of the representation of the political power through the affordable housings, and the architectural typology for affordable houses in Buenos Aires was associated with the verticalization of the city. So, because of this, these neighborhoods, as I showed you, are so important. But also, there is a strong imaginaries of city in Buenos Aires, which is associated with the cultural narrative, the aesthetic narrative I spoke at the beginning. So, what we expect? We expect that even now, we expect a continuous city. Many people have the idea of this integrated, dynamic, well-done city. There is an idea that Buenos Aires is divided in these three ways. No? And where do you live in Buenos Aires is not only the possibility given by the segmented society, the characteristic of the incomes, but also there is a representation of the city, an aspiration of the city. And in Buenos Aires, I hold that this is a democratic way of living, after all, no? In Buenos Aires. The concept of the block, the idea of the aggregation of the buildings in the block, the idea of a landscape which is associated with this aggregation through the time is a well socially accepted, is something strong in Buenos Aires. At the same time, Buenos Aires is veering off, is suffering differentiation areas, and at the same time that I feel that I belong to this neighborhood, that I feel well living here. Now, in the last 20 years, Buenos Aires is each time more divided. There is a kind of scission, the division. There are split cities, divided cities, cities by parts that has, or there is a kind of differentiation and indifferentiation with the others. And you can find there the downtown, the inner neighborhoods, the traditional ones, the periphery, the riverfront, which is where the, the financing is more strong, the traditional parks, which are receiving the large investments, and the urban vacancies areas in the city, which are also being occupied by high-rise and the real estate buildings. This is the a very skeptical idea of the different areas in Buenos Aires where the densification by verticalization is given. But about the imaginaries of the city, of course, the new image of the Buenos Aires is the Puerto Madero skyline. For large segments of the society of Buenos Aires, even for poor people, this is an image with that gives identification, a social identification. Okay, I have different cases. Through the research, we try to understand the relationship of this high rise with the street. And we found, well, the different kinds of alignments and setbacks, offset of the buildings according to the street, and how the high rise shapes the space of the street. And a street which is very alive because of the tensions between the quadra and the corners. The corners, the intersection of the street, and the quadra is the distance from one corner to the other. And the profusion of the interactions of people's uses in the level of the street, which is so distinctive in Buenos Aires. This image of a public space at the street level, very, very alive, very mixed-used, an image that now is under transformation because of the pandemic. But in Buenos Aires, the idea of the active facade at the first, at the ground level, is even now very, very strong. So, living these kind of landscapes is very interesting, and it's a general acceptance in Buenos Aires. I'm sorry. What would happen? Just for finishing, a brief, sorry. Okay. Oh, no, what happened here? Back to the beginning, not possible. Speaking of verticalization in Buenos Aires, is also to speak about some critical projects. I'm sorry, I lost the order of the presentation. So, in the last 5 years, Buenos Aires is the local government is proposing special areas for high-rise development. And this is the new riverfront of the city, which is a new line between the Catalinas Norte and the Rio de la Plata. This is a new area of intervention. There are 3 or 4 areas like this in Buenos Aires. These are public lands which are lent to private capitals. All these lands was given to private national capitals. No? This was expected that international funds, global funds, could impact here, but it was not so. So, just to finish, this Buenos Aires dewesternized gaze to verticalization process. This is the beginning, the question at the very beginning. Yes, I can say yes. We can put a gaze, a dewesternized gaze. We can make this kind of association. Yes, but the dewesternized case is not for a political or cultural resistance, not at least because of a political cultural resistance, because even in the Kirchnerism, in the government of Néstor Kirchner, Cristina, and now Alberto Fernández, where there is some kind of a resistance to the globalization, to the of the United States and the Europe as the main representation of the Western economy. Even now, there is not a full resistance to the Western, because maybe an anti-Western discourse, but in the logic of the dynamic, we function, we work at a very westernized country. So there is a dissociation between the political discourse as the logic, the westernized logic of the development of the nation in general, in Buenos Aires in particular. Nevertheless, this westernized logic, rationality, is weak in the country. And because of this weakness, we could speak about a de-westernized, not because an opposition, but because a lack of intensity of the westernization. Because of this, some authors about then Sokolov talk about the variegated Argentinian finance capitalism. Not only strong, non-orthodox capitalism, but a variegated Argentinian finance capitalism. There are lines of strong capitalism, but it's not a mainstream. But the background is that the logic of finance, but the phenomena is a diverse, variegated manifestation of this logic. Just to close, Buenos Aires is a Western global city. Yes, it is. But paradoxically, it is on the margins of the globalization and at the core of the Western culture. O sea, belong to the Western culture, but it's not in the mainstream of the economical financing capitalism. Something that is, of course, is a personal conclusion open to the discussion. I retain that in the case of Buenos Aires, high-rise buildings, as another conclusion, may contribute to the sustainable city. The worst condition is given by the suburbanization of Buenos Aires that began in the 90s and continues till now. That's the very urban problem of Buenos Aires. The amount of people who moved away from Buenos Aires city to the suburbs, and moved to the gated suburban, to the gated suburban areas, to the country clubs. I think that's the more important danger for the city. Buenos Aires is a very vital and intensive city, and it has to be also with the high-rise buildings. Its vitality in some depends on the densification that is possible even now because of the process of verticalization, which is the strongest in Buenos Aires, the structure of grid and blocks, of course, the concept of public life, which is even now, even the privatism, even considering the individualism, private life for many people is very, very important. Till now, it's a kind of tension between the new tendency since the 90s. It's very strong also the means of what is to be a porteño. No? So, with these references, I finish my presentation. I want to thank a lot your patience and your attention. And I hope you have some questions, and I remain open to the debate. Thank you very much for the opportunity of being here, and thank you for staying there till now. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Julio, for the presentation of your research and for such dense reflections to think about verticalization in the Argentina context. Now we start a debate with some questions. I would like to start with a question about the relation between community that used to live in the high-rise neighborhoods and the territory transformations. Throughout the examples, you have shown the relationship between the image of the city and the urban fabric related to high-rise buildings. How do you analyze the use of public space around these buildings? How their meanings have changed throughout the verticalization process, specifically in Catalina Norte District or Puerto Madeira areas?
Yes, thank you, Camila. Catalinas and Puerto Madero belongs to two different periods. Catalina belongs to the period of the development, the desarrollismo. That was a period of the development of the national industry on the 60s and the 70s. So Catalina is the expression of the corporate tower, but what kind of corporations? National corporations. All the buildings in Catalinas Norte belonged to national enterprises. For instance, the National Petroleum Company was set there. The Unión Industrial Argentina, the FAPIS, the Union of the Industrials, were placed there. And the IBM was placed there. No? So, it's okay. National companies or international companies that want to be in Argentina were placed in Catalinas Norte. In the context of the internationalization, but not of the globalization. Puerto Madero belongs to the globalization process properly. So the concept is different in Catalinas Norte. Catalinas Norte belongs to the city as part of the city. It's a specialized district in the downtown area. Puerto Norte is a different conception of the city. It's a transformation by the appropriation of the landscape of the old harbor, first of all. There is in the origin, there is a thematic theme, the image of the harbor. It's a thematic city. Then it's opportunity for the global funds investments. It's thought from the rationality of the global investments. That was not the case because it belongs to another historical movement in Catalinas Norte. So there is also a different connection between Puerto Madero and the city because you have the harbor facilities in between. So the connection between the city and Puerto Madero is by only 4 avenues, only four gates in order to reach Puerto Madero. And Puerto Madero had the first step that was the reuse of the docks, just in front of the first line of the docks. But the evolution of Puerto Madero was going through the river for the high-rise residential buildings, mostly, and some other cases of office buildings. But the most of Puerto Madero's high-rise buildings are residential, high-standard residential. That was probably the opportunity of international funds or global funds, not international, global funds that were there. But there is something which is a paradox. Being the paradise of the privatopia, Puerto Madero, the paradise of the private style life of being, the private of the self-made society, it has an intense public life, not given by people who have their residence there, but for people who from abroad, from some other places of the city, used to go to the public parks in Puerto Madero. That's something paradox, because being almost almost a gated area, almost a closed area in Buenos Aires. At the same time, the dynamic of the city gets a kind of good appropriation of the public spaces. Which are the public spaces? Beside the construction of the high-rise building for residential uses, there has been built 3 wonderful parks with a very, very nice design. And these parks are not not as much used by the resident people, but from people from many other places of Buenos Aires who used to go in the weekend to spend the afternoon there in the Puerto Madero. So Buenos Aires has this possibility. It's so strong, the concept of this traditional city, the public space, but at the same time, it's so strong the idea of a closed city, elitized city, that there is a kind of confrontation. And in Puerto Madero, that confrontation is visible because from one time the elite living according their special style of life, but a democratic general use of the public spaces is also possible. I think it's interesting to recognize this. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Julio. I think Professor Manuel has a question. Your microphone.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot, Professor Julio, for your brilliant presentation and all the contextualization about the process or the different process of verticalization in Buenos Aires. My question is related to the present moment. You mentioned, I'm sorry, you mentioned that differently from other metropolitan cities, the capital that finances the verticalization nowadays is the national one. The Argentinian capital related basically to the agribusiness. It comes from the land properties and the agribusiness. And also you made a distinction between international and global funds. Well, my question is, to what extent this Argentinian capital is not associated with the transnational capitals, of the corporations, of the transnational corporations and so on, and therefore, to what extent can we be affirmative that the capital that finances the verticalization process nowadays in Argentina is only Argentinian? And the second part is, I mean, if it's Argentinian, independently of the origin of the capital, does it have a particular singularity in the process, or does it follow the same logic of the neoliberal urbanism that establishes the conditions of production and reproduction of the contemporary city? Or as it's there are such strong cultural issues that places the ground of the process in Buenos Aires. Does it have a singularity, or does it answer to the same logic of production in terms of promoting a city of utopia and not a more democratic city?
Okay. Thank you, Manuel, Buenos Aires receive international funds, of course, but mostly are Argentinians, not all. Why? Because why Sao Paulo received much more funds, much more global funds than Buenos Aires? Because Buenos Aires and Argentina is very contradictory from the point of view of the neoliberal powers. It belongs, but at the same time, it's so special because of the risk, because of the political instability, because that Buenos Aires is an interrogation mark for investors. The best period was from 2003 to 2008, 7. That was the period that even under the government of Nestor Kirchner and the first year of Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, with a political discourse that talk about a human capitalism and a national capitalism, a capitalism with the democratic phase. At the same time, they received large investment from especially the agribusiness and the minería in English, mining, and the mining. And that was the moment that there was a real flux of capitals from abroad to Argentina. And there was a clear development of Puerto Madero as some other places in Buenos Aires with these international capitals. This was the second moment of the fluxes of capitals, of global capitals in Buenos Aires. The first one was in the 90s with Carlos Menem administration. That was the period where more clearly the global funds got into Argentina. And they promoting 2 or 3 special places. Puerto Madero was one, of course, the first stage of Puerto Madero, but also I remember the incomplete transformation of Mercado de Abasto, the one area in Buenos Aires. Mercado de Abasto is the general market of Buenos Aires, a building with arcs that I saw in one image. The whole area went into a process of gentrification with the construction of Highrise, and was strictly the logic of the transformation of the city according to the financing process in the 90s. Then we have the crisis of the last of the century. After in the post-crisis, with Kirchner and Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, we had the second period in where it was more clear the presence of the global capitals in Buenos Aires. After 2008, the flux of capitals almost is closed, stopped. Why? Because the alternances of the economy of the country, with the think about the crisis of the at the middle time of the government of Mauricio Macri in Argentina, was a how to say fuga in English, please, Manuel? Fuga de capitales. Go away of the capitals. Was a huge go away of capitals in Argentina. And in this moment, there are much more money, Argentinian money, outside, abroad, than in the country. So the logic is one, but the application of the logic is different in Argentina. And at the same time, trying to answer to the second question, I think the logic is one, but at the same time, cultural issues are very important here. I think there is a kind of tension. I appreciate, I find that the private life is much more important. I want to live by myself, but at the same time, it's a kind of dissociation in the urban inhabitant of the porteño, that trying to live in a very individualistic way of life, at the same time go to the open spaces, try to leave the city, spend time in social spaces. It's very intriguing that, because it's a kind of contrast, a contradiction, I find. And I'm trying to read some anthropologists who are studying these processes. Perhaps it's common to different cities, of course, but in Buenos Aires, the myth is working hard even today. The imagination of a city. So there is like in music, you have a bass, a constant rhythm, which is the logic of the finance capital, but a melody which is very different. And what I told to Camila some minutes ago, that the democratization of Puerto Madero is something unbelievable, because Puerto Madero could not be as much exclusive as people living there would imagine, because now they have a lot of people from many other parts of Buenos Aires that go there, Puerto Madero, but not now because of the pandemic, of course, but there was a mix of people in a very exclusive area that I didn't saw it so much in other places, where the gated area, the exclusive area, they are more effective in their divisions. In the case of Puerto Madero, it's very interesting. And even Catalinas is more mixed used, and, well, yes, I think the cultural issues in Buenos Aires are particularly important.
Thank you, Professor Julio.
No, thank you.
I have a curiosity about the condominium law. In some cities in Brazil, in the 40s, 50s, there was a certain rejection of high-rise buildings for residential uses. Some authors justify that for the sharing of the private property and the memory of lower class houses. In Argentina, how was the process of accepting this new way of life in high-rise buildings?
In Buenos Aires, in in Buenos Aires city, middle classes love to live in high-rise buildings in general. And the condominium is a way of living. Of course, there is some kind of conflictive in the condominiums, but the porteños, people from Buenos Aires, are used to live in condominiums. And many of them prefer and love to live in that way. At the same time, for many of them, the idea of the suburban is strong, mainly in the young people, because they expect another way of life for their family. But again, I think the general expectation is that, after all, it's a good idea to live in Buenos Aires in high-rise buildings. As you see, there are a lot of areas in the inner Buenos Aires, the traditional neighborhoods, where there is a good convivence of high-rise and low-rise buildings. It's part of the idea of Buenos Aires, also the heterogeneity of the fabric and the diverse landscape. So for middle classes, to live in a neighborhood with high-rise buildings and low-rise buildings is it's okay, it's good, and it's accepted. What is the trouble is who live in a isolated and a gated tower, because in that case, you have a closed space, you have an absence of relationship between the people living there and the city. It's a neutral presence of the high-rise buildings. So it's a discontinuity, physical, social, and cultural discontinuity of the city. But in the other cases, the high-rise buildings is just the normal. Even in the popular areas, high-rise buildings is the possibility of a better dwelling. And it's okay. I think Buenos Aires is a dense city and is a high-rise city. But high-rise doesn't mean the same before the 90s and after the 90s. That I try to explain as a conclusion, because there is not only an economical change, but a cultural change. The introduction of the preeminence of the private after the 90s, with the introduction of the neoliberalism, introduced a new tension in Buenos Aires. But even so, to live in high-rise buildings, to live in condominiums is a good option in Buenos Aires.
Thank you, Professor Julio.
Gracias.
We don't have any more questions in the chat, but I'm sure that we will have many issues to think about the transformations of the contemporary city and the high-rise living. I think we could finish the debate.
Yes.
Thank you again, Professor Julio. I would like to thank all who participate in this conference in YouTube, and thank you again, Professor.
Thank you. I appreciate your work. Thank you for being here.
I would like to thank the organization of Highrise Symposium for this opportunity. Yes. The next activity of Highrise Symposium will be in a few hours at 1 p.m. with panel 4. I think that's it for now. Thank you and bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.